Guillermo Del Toro's 2022 stop-motion version of Pinocchio takes liberties with a story that you're probably familiar with. There's still the growing nose and the father named Geppetto, there's a sea monster and a cricket as a conscience, but the film doesn't look or feel like the animated Disney film. That film, one of Disney's earliest feature-length movies, still holds up to this day as a marvel of cinematography and storytelling. The entire theme of Disney, When You Wish Upon a Star, is derived from that movie. Although Snow White was the first feature film and important for various reasons, I think that Pinocchio is Disney's true artistic masterpiece, and I don't know if I would say the same for Del Toro's version, since he's had plenty of films in his catalog that can be considered his masterpiece, Pan's Labyrinth or The Shape of Water potentially being two of them. But there is something unique to his version of Pinocchio, which made me start thinking about this classic tale. Why do we keep telling it? What benefit is there in its retelling? Here's what I'm getting at. In 2022, there were 3 different versions of Pinocchio on film, and each adaptation was different from the others. While we could go in depth on the voice acting or animation styles, I want to focus on how each works to either adapt the story successfully or not, and why that is. I sat down and in a single day I watched the Del Toro film, the Disney live-action remake, and the Pauly Shore voiced animated version, and I took a bunch of notes, but there were some themes that I kept coming back to. Not now, I'm making a video. Lindsay Lohan?
You should try to make something more topical.
Pinocchio's Christmas. It's really weird. Are you feeling okay? Are you talking to Lindsay Lohan again?
No? Yes? I'm not sure, but I've got this idea for the channel that I think will work.
I just needed to confirm that you're making a video about something relevant.
Yeah, it's on all those different Pinocchio films that came out in 2022.
Will you get to the point faster? You can't keep making longer videos leaving people hanging with drawn-out side tangents.
I'll get there faster if you stop calling. Plus, people hate you now. Haven't you read any of the comments? Anyhow, my name's Josh Taylor, this is Modern Mouse, and today we're going to be talking about Pinocchio, like all 3 of them from 2022, plus some. And we're going to be using them to discuss what I think is an important question. What makes a good adaptation?
It's me! Look, here it comes! It's him! Oh, it's Pinocchio! Thank you. Oh, you're very kind. Not right now, I'm sorry.
There are plenty of reasons to celebrate Guillermo Del Toro's version of Pinocchio. The most obvious thing to point out is the stop-motion animation itself. It has the right amount of clunkiness to feel like classic stop-motion, but enough fluidity, especially in the camera movements, that it feels a cut above the stop-motion films that came before it. In terms of storytelling though, I find it fascinating and worthwhile to use early 20th century Italy as a setting, rather than it taking place in the 1800s or leaving it fairly vague, which is what most versions have done. The idea that Pinocchio comes to life in a country with political turmoil and is on the cusp of another world war adds to the trouble that Pinocchio can get into, and the stakes that are at hand. The use of Christianity within the town that Geppetto and Pinocchio live also rings true to the setting, and adds once again a bit more to the trouble that Pinocchio can get into, considering that it's where he meets many of the town's people. Those things do make it an interesting and unique adaptation, as it definitely evolves the story from what it was and has been before. Evolution is personally something I don't think enough people talk about when it comes to adaptations. Something like Peter Pan continues to get adapted over and over with nearly identical story elements, still putting the darling children in the turn of the 20th century England, taking them off to Neverland and fighting off pirates. That kind of results in the same lessons and morality that the story has always had, and it makes each new version a little more forgettable. A good adaptation can present a story with the same skeleton of ideas, but morph it into something new. When it comes to stories that have been told over and over and over again, I think about a story like Romeo and Juliet and how it's evolved. Sure, there are faithful adaptations like the 2013 Romeo and Juliet film, or the bonkers Hawaiian shirt-filled Baz Luhrmann-directed adaptation with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes.
A crow.
I'll go along, no such sight to be shown, but to rejoice in splendor of mine own.
But then there's evolutions like West Side Story, keeping the elements of rival families and forbidden lovers, but setting it in New York City and bringing up how racism has played a factor in love. I doubt that many people remember the 2013 Romeo and Juliet film, and most people probably just remember the Baz Luhrmann version for how stylistically insane it is. But West Side Story, in all of its different forms, has adapted the story of Romeo and Juliet and is memorable because it feels relevant. I could also make the case that the newest version is the best version, because it doesn't have people in makeup pretending to not be white, but that's not what this video is about.
Good thing we learned that lesson and never whitewashed roles meant for people of color again.
Bergman.
His art form.
My name come up?
Yep, and that's all we're gonna say about that.
So Shakespeare's been adapted like a whole lot. What do you think some of the best adaptations have been?
Well, there's 10 Things I Hate About You, which is probably the best version of The Taming of the Shrew, at least that I could think of, and I'm pretty sure that nobody else could name a better version.
Yeah, or like The Lion King being Hamlet. Except for if they were accurate, Nala would have drowned herself and Simba would have been killed by her brother. Dark.
Right, and although it isn't an exact adaptation, it still contains the skeletal ideas that make it a Hamlet story, but for an audience that isn't looking to hear Shakespearean English, but just wants to sing along with a warthog and meerkat. But this is also old Billy Shakespeare we're talking about. His stories have great skeletons, and his stories are easily adaptable and understood. I don't know if I could say the same for Pinocchio and its author Carlo Collodi, who fell back on writing children's stories after a career writing in politics. Honestly, Pinocchio's kind of a mess.
Speaking of mess, are you going to talk about the Pauly Shore version that came out this year?
Yeah, and it's not great, Joe. There are some of the usual things that you would find in a Pinocchio story, like Geppetto making a wooden puppet, or, the circus being a setting.
I tried to avoid watching it, so whatever you say it's about, I'm going to go with.
Well, so it doesn't have like a cricket character. Instead, it has a horse that's voiced by Napoleon Dynamite. He kind of plays the conscience character, and at one point, like a cat shoots him.
Don't you worry, Senor Geppetto. I've got everything under control.
Why? Why would a cat try to shoot the horse?
Oh, no, sorry. The cat doesn't try and shoot the horse. The cat shoots Pinocchio because as a talking, walking cat, he was freaked out by a talking, walking, giant wooden puppet character because apparently that's the thing that was out of the ordinary.
It wouldn't buy!
Gotcha, yeah, because, that makes total sense, I guess?
Okay, back on track here, and first we have to talk a little bit about Carlo Collodi in order to understand why Pinocchio is such a difficult story to adapt and why each version of it is so different. To learn more, I actually went to the Italian American Museum here in Los Angeles, where they have this Pinocchio exhibit. Collodi started publishing The Adventures of Pinocchio as a serial in magazines, starting in the late 1800s, and prior to that he had written about Italian politics, until he was fed up with how the country was run, and instead turned to translating fairy tales in his native language. He saw the possibilities in using a fairy tale story as an allegory for his somewhat pessimistic and uninspired feelings about the world, so he wrote a tale, Pinocchio. And for 4 months, readers were treated to a very strange story about a man who carved a boy from wood that was already alive. He was a mischievous wooden doll that kills crickets, and there was a ghost waiting for her coffin, and Pinocchio ends up dead by the end of the story. Collodi wrote the story of Pinocchio because the literacy level was pretty low at that time. Italy had just taken a bunch of different regions and unified them into one country. The chaos of now having many different languages and a lack of educational materials for this new unified Italy left a gap that Collodi saw that he could fit into. It wasn't that he loved children, in fact he didn't like children at all, but as a political activist he saw a way that he could better his country. So, for several months he ended up writing a serialized children's story in a magazine to better literacy. But then the story picked up steam, so a year later he opted to continue writing Pinocchio, and the elements that followed would become the ones that we're more familiar with. The blue fairy telling him that he can be a real boy if he behaves, the nose that grows from telling lies. Ultimately, the earlier stories would be rewritten into the new ones for a book release, and then Pinocchio became much more well known as it was translated into multiple languages. And adaptations weren't far off either, as the first film version of the story came out in 1911.
Okay, wait. Still stuck on the Pauly Shore version. So the cricket is a horse, and they gave the cat guns. What other crazy changes did they make?
Well, some things are the same. Like I said, there's the circus, and that's kind of it. Also, there's a girl who I think is supposed to be like the ghost from the original story.
The ghost from the original. That's not even slightly ringing a bell. Does she do ghosty things?
No, but she does sing a very generic song or two.
Oh, I didn't know the Pauly Shore version was a musical.
It's really not. It's more like a reason for Pinocchio to fall in love with her.
Oh, so it's a non-musical that still managed to have bad songs. Yeah, I'm glad I skipped that one.
Who's there?
It's just me.
Pinocchio, you need to listen to me. I have to tell you something.
I'm here to tell you something, too.
More important than the awkward songs and horses in Pauly Shore's Pinocchio is the lack of what I'd consider is the main purpose in telling Pinocchio, or one of the reasons that this story gets adapted over and over again. And that's the question of what does it take to become a real boy? Or, put it another way, what does it take to become a moral person? Credit where it's due, the Pauly Shore and Jon Heder voiced version does show how a young wooden boy becomes corrupted, and he chooses to make money for his family rather than go to school. There is that. Unfortunately, this version of the story doesn't really want to focus on what it takes to be a good person. It's mostly an animated movie made to capitalize off of the name value of the story and involve itself in as little morality as possible. Pinocchio defeats the bad guys, he gets the girl, and goes on to live with Geppetto happily ever after. But there's also skilled horse riding for some reason, and a cat and fox with guns, and I guess a private detective. The story being based around morality really is fitting for its author. Collodi, once again not really caring for children, saw an opportunity not just to make Italy more literate, but also to showcase the morals that he saw fit, and hoping that he would see better behaved children. You could probably pick up on some of the morality that Collodi wanted, like never talking back to people, listening to what your father has to say, going to school, and never lying. And this fit in perfectly with 1800s Catholic Italy. One thing about the Italian American Museum and its Pinocchio exhibit is that it has a variety of different things to see from numerous adaptations. There's a sense of pride around this story, and I think that stems once again from the values of Italian people. Even outside of this exhibit, there seems to be a passion for religion, hard work, and minding your manners. Those are the things that Italians brought with them to America, and even through their own issues in America, they held on to those values. Of course, the one adaptation that the museum puts the most emphasis on, and is the most well-known, is the animated Disney version from 1940. Walt Disney never stated his political or religious affiliations, but he did grow up in a conservative household, and you can see some of that morality from Collodi's version of the story holding over. Of course, there's no lying and listening to your father, but Disney's version of the story does make a few changes to the original, including the behavior of the boys at Pleasure Island. In the book version, children get turned into donkeys at a similar place, but in Disney's version, we see kids drinking, smoking, and overeating. This all makes sense since the Great Depression had just ended along with Prohibition. Rationing food was seen as a good thing. Drinking was illegal for years and still seen as immoral after Prohibition ended, and smoking had become a major issue for children in America by the 20th century. This is how Disney chose to adapt the story for a new generation in 1940, which set a standard for a conservative approach to morality. Kids need to go to school, not lie, or fight or talk back to authority figures. And they shouldn't be drinking or smoking or gambling or choosing what they eat and when. And what really gets me is that in the 2022 live-action Disney remake, it's that they choose to not really readapt the story, but instead the focus is just to retell the animated version. There are a few differences, like in this version we learn that Geppetto had lost his own son, and that's why he wishes for Pinocchio to come to life. And then there's the very strange choice to make Pinocchio such a good swimmer that his legs make a motorboat sound.
I actually tried to watch this movie with my 2-year-old, but he wasn't into it.
I don't blame him. I love Tom Hanks, but this was just not a good Disney live-action remake. Actually, I think it might be my least favorite of all the remakes.
Yeah, Tom Hanks was a weird choice. Like, he's got great America's Grandpa vibes these days, but I don't even think he's slightly Italian.
Okay, but could you imagine Robert De Niro or John Travolta in this role?
Could have used Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel? He understands the importance of family.
Salute me, familia.
Vin Diesel is Italian, which is weird, but Stanley Tucci was right there.
Or you could remake the whole thing with Steve Buscemi.
Honestly, I would buy Steve Buscemi making a creepy wooden doll in the form of his old dead son in order to wish him to life.
Quick, Josh. To the Disney phone. They're definitely going to go with this idea when they remake the movie.
Yes, Tom Hanks was an uninspired choice to play Geppetto, but what I find most striking about this version of Pinocchio is how it chooses to treat its main character with the lessons he has to learn. They just feel very outdated. The idea that Pinocchio couldn't play a game of pool with his friend, or how he got scolded for being persuaded by the fox and cat characters. Ultimately, it's a film that makes me feel bad for Pinocchio and other children, because in order to be seen as respectable citizens, they have to never question authority, and never seek out adventure on their own. It's clear that this version of Pinocchio was made without readapting it, because Disney was afraid that audiences would reject it if it changed too much. But in not changing it at all, the movie comes off as far too old-fashioned, and just as much as a hollow cash grab as the other version where Napoleon Dynamite plays a horse. The trouble with adapting such a messy story like Pinocchio is that it's easy to make a lazy version like the Pauly Shore one, or an outdated one like the Disney live-action remake. It's a situation where the adapter has more control over the story than the original author ever did, and because of that, each new adaptation showcases the morality that the adapter has decided to create. The morals of 1800s Italy are not the morals of mid-century America, and the morals of mid-century America are not the morals of 21st century America. But these aren't the only adaptations that were messy.
There's just a crazy amount of adaptations. Didn't Drew Carey play Geppetto at some point?
Yeah. In that one, Julia Louis-Dreyfus was the Blue Fairy, too. It was like a made-for-TV Disney live-action remake. I honestly forgot about that one till now.
And Jonathan Taylor Thomas did a version too, which makes sense because he's always been kind of a little wooden boy.
Yeah, he sure was. In that one, I remember Rob Schneider voicing the Fox character, and that movie came out like right before Deuce Bigalow Male Gigolo.
Okay, but I think the strangest and probably most high concept version had to be Spielberg's AI.
Which was originally written by Stanley Kubrick, which gives it kind of this like weird tone.
Yeah, AI the movie just came across so cold it felt like it could have been written by actual AI. It just lacked the warmth of a usual Spielberg film.
And that gives me an idea. I'm gonna shoot an email your way, but I'm gonna wrap up this bit about AI really quick. In AI, Haley Joel Osment's character David is a robot that wants to be a real boy, because he thinks that in order to be loved, he has to be real. So he goes searching for the only ways that he thinks that he can be a real boy. He does get to be loved for a single day thanks to the androids of the future, but it isn't because of the lessons that he learns on his odyssey to get to that point. Really, he's granted the wish of love, not on his own merit, but because androids are curious about the emotions of humans, and they want to study the interactions that he has with his mother during that day. There are definitely lessons that you can pull from the film, like not acting out of jealousy or to speak up for yourself in a time of need, but those ultimately end up getting ignored by the end of the film.
You got your email. You have to tell me what the hell I'm looking at here.
Okay, you know how there's a bunch of new AI websites where they create art or they write stuff for you? So I was thinking, if Pinocchio becomes a real boy, eventually Geppetto will have to have that birds and bees talk with him. So I asked an AI scriptwriter to create a scene with Geppetto and Pinocchio having that conversation, and I thought that you and I could play the roles.
There's 27 pages of this.
And every bit of it is important, Joe.
Okay. Am I supposed to be Geppetto here?
Yep, that's you, so just take it from the top.
Pinocchio. As an experienced father figure, sex is an integral part of life that can be both beautiful and powerful. I can tell you the do's and don'ts to help you stay safe.
Go on, Papa. Tell me.
Okay. Now, we're not doing this.
What do you mean, Papa?
This feels wrong. This is wrong. You know it's wrong.
Okay, then just keep going. You're doing great. This is going to be a good bit for the video. It's either this or we go back to the anonymous phone calls.
Okay. I hate how you call me Papa. I hate that we did this. I'm gonna go.
Where did Papa go? Pinocchio is such a strange and unique story that you can do almost anything with it. And oftentimes, there are things that you shouldn't do with it. But that leads us back to Guillermo Del Toro's version of Pinocchio, and how it excels beyond what the other versions of 2022 gave us. It both feels familiar and also unrecognizable. Here, we still get Geppetto, a cricket, and an Odyssey-like adventure that brings life lessons to Pinocchio in order for him to become a real boy. What Del Toro does, though, is something significant, and it wasn't until I watched all of the Pinocchio films back to back to where I noticed something. The fox and cat characters don't exist in Del Toro's version. In every other version of the story, they're the ones that push Pinocchio away from his morality. They are the embodiment of unethical behavior. Taking those characters away allows Pinocchio to justify what's right and wrong on his own terms. Rather than listening to others and being persuaded, he can use his own intellect and come to his own conclusions. And because his father figure is gone for most of the movie, stuck inside of a sea monster, he himself has to become a better human by exploring the world, befriending people, and standing up for himself during times of discomfort. He becomes a real boy, not because a cricket or adult told him he accomplished all the things that needed to be done, but because he himself matured by learning lessons on his own. Del Toro's version of Pinocchio leaves us believing that children with minimal guidance can shape themselves into free-thinking, well-adjusted people. Pinocchio's ultimate sacrifice to save his father is one that he makes on his own. It's through love and compassion that he brings Geppetto back to life, something that he didn't really have at the beginning of the story. Had he continually been told to do things, he may have shown respect to others, but because his story is his own, he develops stronger bonds and more complex emotional intelligence. Yes, his journey was much more complicated without somebody telling him what's right or wrong, but the resolution of his story is much more rewarding for both him and the audience. Parenting's really evolved since Carlo Collodi's time. Like, he would probably hate parents now.
Yeah, I don't think I would see eye to eye with him. Also, I hope that whenever you do have kids, they're weird, and they call you Papa in a way that's really unsettling.
Oh, but Papa, what's it like to be a real parent?
I do really hate this bit you're doing, but I love being a dad, and you know, it's interesting that there's like really good lessons about being a parent out of movies.
Yeah, like how Tony Stark watching Spider-Man get turned into dust before his eyes is kind of like a metaphor for watching your kids go off to college, right?
Wait, no, that was your takeaway from that scene? No, not that at all. I'm thinking more along the lines of portrayals of fatherhood in Pixar movies.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that's where you put up with the little graphic. The one that says, next time we talk about Pixar dads or whatever. You know the one.